The bundle of damp, foul-smelling fabric hit my chest before falling to the floor, while the laughter of three young women flooded my own living room. I am Dorothy. I am 68 years old, and my hands have the calluses of someone who raised these walls brick by brick. The document that holds the fate of this property rests in a safe whose combination only I know. And today, the clock started ticking. The physical impact of the clothes against my body didn't hurt as much as the silence that followed it, a thick silence that settled into the stale air of the room. I looked at the garments scattered across the carpet I had vacuumed myself that very morning. There was a cheap silk blouse stained with makeup at the collar, tight sweatpants that still held the acrid stench of dried sweat, and a pair of socks that had rolled to a stop right against the toe of my orthopedic shoes. The sickly sweet, cheap perfume radiating from Brittany, my daughter-in-law, mixed with the stench of dirty laundry, creating a suffocating atmosphere that perfectly summed up what my life had become over the last 2 years. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let my shoulders drop. Behind me, the muffled sound of the television coming from the end of the hallway reminded me that in this house, I was completely alone in my trench. That TV was turned on by Thomas. My husband, Thomas, is 72 years old and has perfected the art of cowardice with a mastery that sometimes, in my darkest moments, I almost admire. We've been married for 45 years. In our youth, he worked at a lumber mill, and I made my living as an upholsterer. My fingers still carry the scars from the curved needles, from stretching heavy leather over hardwood frames, from stapling rough textures until my joints screamed in agony. With the money from those restored sofas, from those dining chairs brought back to life, we bought this lot. I mixed the concrete myself on the weekends. I painted every single window frame. Thomas helped, of course, but his spirit was always fragile, terrified of conflict, prone to ducking his head at the slightest sign of a storm. Now, with old age, that fragility has hardened into a shell of indifference. When Brittany raises her voice, when the slammed doors from my son Jason make the windows rattle, Thomas simply reaches up, turns off his hearing aid, turns up the volume on his football games, and vanishes into his own mind. He decided that peace is bought by surrendering territory, completely ignoring the fact that invaders are never satisfied with just one corner. The invasion didn't start with screaming or with dirty laundry thrown in my face. It started with tears and broken promises, the way the worst family tragedies usually begin. Jason, my only son, had tried to open a cell phone parts import business. He took out loans he couldn't pay back. He trusted partners who abandoned him at the first sign of bankruptcy, and at 40 years old, he found himself staring into a financial abyss with a wife who was absolutely unwilling to give up her lifestyle. I remember the night they showed up at my door. It was pouring rain, one of those November storms that turn the streets into rivers of mud. Jason had red eyes, slumped shoulders, the spitting image of defeat. Brittany stood right beside him holding a designer suitcase that contrasted absurdly with the misery of the moment. She was crying too, or at least faking it with a conviction that, at the time, actually moved me. "It'll just be for a few months, Mom," Jason begged as we sat at the kitchen table, and I poured them hot coffee. "Just until I get a steady job and we can rent a small place. I swear we won't be a burden." I looked at my son, the boy whose school costumes I had sewn, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, and I felt that ancient primal pull in my gut that dooms mothers to sacrifice their own peace for the survival of their blood. I said yes. Thomas nodded silently from his chair, already surrendering his territory. I gave them the guest room, the biggest one after the master bedroom, the one with the large window overlooking the rose garden I had planted 3 decades ago. I cleared space in my closets, emptied 3 shelves in the fridge, and handed them a set of keys. That was my first tactical error. I thought I was unlocking the doors to a temporary shelter, when in reality, I was handing over the keys to my own prison. For the first few months, they kept up the facade of gratitude. Brittany would wake up early, make breakfast, sweep the patio, and call me Miss Dorothy with a sweetness that made my teeth ache. Jason got a job as a route supervisor at a logistics company, a decent gig that covered their basic bills. But human beings can't fake their true nature for very long. Brittany's courtesy had an expiration date, and it expired the exact second she realized Thomas wouldn't enforce a single rule, and that I, in my desperate attempt to keep the family peace, preferred to stay quiet rather than start a war under my own roof. The metamorphosis was gradual, calculated, almost invisible at first. First, their contributions to the household expenses vanished. The money they were supposedly going to hand over at the end of the month to help with the water and power bills was suddenly never mentioned again. One day, after getting an electric bill that was double our usual usage, I asked Jason about it. Brittany cut in before my son could even form a word. "We're saving up for our own place, Dorothy," she said, dropping the miss for the very first time. "We thought the whole point was for us to get independent quickly. If we pay you rent, we'll never be able to leave. Besides, this house is already paid off. It's not like it cost you extra to have us here." The logic was sick, twisted, but Jason looked at her with pure devotion and nodded, silently pleading for my patience with his eyes. I shoved the bill deep into my apron pocket and paid it out of my own retirement check. I stayed quiet. I watched. I started taking mental notes of every single move on the board. Then came the hostile takeover of the physical space. My potted ferns and African violets were banished to the backyard because, according to Brittany, they gave her allergies and made the house look like a grandma's place. In their place appeared cheap, shiny plastic decorations, fashion magazines scattered across the tables, shoes dumped in the hallway. The kitchen, my sanctuary for 40 years, turned into a minefield. Brittany stopped cooking and started ordering takeout almost every single night. Greasy pizza boxes, half-eaten containers of Asian food, sticky glasses, everything was left on the counter for me to clean up the next morning. If I didn't do it, the ants would invade the place. Jason would leave for work before the sun was even fully up, completely blind and deaf to the disaster his wife left in her wake. When I tried to talk to him alone one morning while packing his thermos with coffee, he cut me off with an impatience that hurt worse than any insult. "Mom, please, Brittany is depressed about our situation." "Don't pressure her, just clean up whatever she leaves out. I'll make it up to you later. Don't make a big deal out of something so small." That was the exact moment I realized I had lost my son. He was no longer the man I had raised. He had mutated into a human shield for a woman who despised me. And Brittany's contempt wasn't silent. It was active, loud, and deeply cruel. Once she realized how passive I was, that I was picking up her dirty plates and scrubbing her grease-caked pans without a word of complaint, she started treating me not like a host, but like a live-in maid she had scored for free. Worse still, she spun a twisted narrative to justify their presence in the house to the outside world. I heard it for the first time about 8 months ago. Brittany was on the phone out in the hallway, her voice ringing out with that grating pitch of someone who needs the entire world to pay attention to her. "Yeah, girl, it's exhausting," she said, sighing dramatically. "Jason and I had to move in here to take care of his parents. They're getting really old, you know. Dorothy can barely keep herself together, and Thomas is practically deaf. If we weren't here keeping this place running, they'd fall apart. It's a massive sacrifice for our marriage, but hey, family comes first." I was standing 10 feet away, holding a laundry basket that weighed 20 pounds, a basket packed with her bed sheets and my son's work shirts. I felt the blood boiling in my veins, a furious heat rising from my stomach straight up to my throat. The lie was so colossal, so utterly shameless, that for a split second I was ready to drop the basket, march over to her, rip the phone out of her hands, and scream the truth to whoever was on the other end of the line. I wanted to tell them she hadn't paid a single utility bill in a year and a half. I wanted to tell them she slept until noon. I wanted to tell them this house was kept standing by my daily labor, by the sweat of my brow, and by my retirement money. But I stopped myself. My personality has always been that of a woman who thinks before she acts. A woman who knows that wars aren't won with impulsive screaming matches in a hallway. As an upholsterer, I learned that if you cut the fabric in a fit of frustration, you ruin the entire piece of furniture. You have to measure twice, take a deep breath, and make the cut only when you are absolutely certain the line is perfect. I tightened my grip on the plastic rim of the laundry basket. I turned around in silence and carried the clothes to the bedrooms. That day, something soft and maternal died inside of me, and in its place, a sentinel made of ice was born. That strategic coldness was what allowed me to endure the following months. I watched as Brittany invited her friends over more frequently, turning my living room into her private country club. I watched as Thomas retreated earlier and earlier to his corner, cranking up the volume on his games to block out reality. I watched Jason come home exhausted, kiss his wife on the forehead, and lock himself in their room, completely ignoring me unless he needed his uniform ironed. I kept cleaning, I kept cooking, I kept paying, but I also started getting my paperwork in order. I reviewed the deed to the house. I went to the notary in total silence one Tuesday morning while they were both asleep. I asked precise questions, got crystal clear answers, and locked the resulting paperwork inside the wall safe hidden behind a false panel in my bedroom closet. A safe Thomas had completely forgotten existed, and whose combination only I knew. I was prepping the battlefield, waiting for the exact moment Brittany's insolence crossed the point of no return. That moment arrived today, on a Thursday afternoon that started with a thick, palpable tension in the air. Since noon, Brittany had been frantic. She announced that two of her best friends were coming over, women she knew from her days of supposed wealth, women who wore designer labels and drove brand new SUVs. Brittany wanted to impress them. She wanted to keep the charade alive that she was the lady of the manor, the sacrificial benefactor running a massive estate. At 1 in the afternoon, she found me in the kitchen making a lentil stew. She stomped in, arms crossed, a deep scowl on her face. "Dorothy, I need you to turn that off," she ordered, pointing at the pot. "The smell of poor people food is going to get trapped in the curtains." I ordered sushi platters and imported cheese boards. "My friends are getting here at 4. I want you to deep clean the living room, dust all the furniture, and make sure the guest bathroom is spotless. And please, when they get here, don't just hover around. I don't want you making them uncomfortable. You can stay in your room or go out to the yard with Thomas." I looked at her. I just looked at her. There wasn't a single ounce of respect in her eyes, only the cold demand of someone who believes they have absolute power over an inferior. In another era, any woman from my generation would have raised a hand or spat an insult that would have made the drywall crack. But not me. I nodded slowly. I turned off the burner under the lentils. I grabbed the dusting rag and headed to the living room. I cleaned. I polished the oak wood that I had sanded down myself 20 years ago. I vacuumed the rug. I scrubbed the guest bathroom until the tiles reflected my own tired, emotionless face. Thomas watched me from his recliner. He saw the tight clench of my jaw and, without saying a single word, grabbed his little portable radio and slipped out the back door into the yard, running away from the incoming confrontation, just like always. At 4:15, the doorbell rang. I heard Brittany's heels clicking frantically down the hardwood hallway. She opened the door, and a chorus of high-pitched voices and exaggerated gasps flooded the entryway. It was two women, predictably weighed down by flashy jewelry and perfumes that practically assaulted the senses. From the kitchen, where I had obediently taken refuge, I listened to the dynamic. Brittany guided them into the living room, offering them white wine and setting out the food platters that I had been forced to receive from the delivery guy and arrange on my best ceramic serving dishes. The conversation was frivolous, hollow, punctuated by shrill laughter. They talked about vacations they could no longer afford, about designer bags they were dying to buy, about the lives of other people they looked down on. And, inevitably, the topic shifted to me. "Oh, Brittany, seriously, this house is massive," one of the voices said, dripping with fake awe. "Doesn't it take so much work to keep it up? With your in-laws getting so old, you must be exhausted." "You have no idea, girl," Brittany replied, sighing with that theatrical flair that was suffocating me. "It's a full-time job. I literally have to shadow the old lady to make sure she doesn't ruin everything. She's losing her mind, you know. Forgets to clean, cooks stuff that smells disgusting. But whatever. Jason begged me to be patient. We give them a roof over their heads and food to eat. The absolute least they can do is stay out of the way." End quote. We give them a roof. That phrase floated in the kitchen air, heavy as an anvil. We give them a roof in the house my calluses built. In the house whose deed is exclusively in my name, because Thomas insisted on putting it in my name 3 decades ago to protect me if he passed away. In the house where I pay the power, the water, the gas, and even the Wi-Fi connection Brittany uses to upload pictures of her fake life to the internet. I waited a few minutes. I let them drink more wine. I let them get real comfortable inside their bubble of superiority. Then, I grabbed an empty serving tray and walked toward the living room. My initial intention was simply to clear the dirty glasses, maintain my submissive facade a little longer, and mentally document the humiliation to fuel my resolve. I stepped into the living room silently. The three women were sitting on the main sofa, the exact same sofa I had reupholstered with dark green velvet that took me months to save up for. When they saw me, Brittany's friends went dead silent, looking me up and down with a vile mix of pity and disgust. Brittany tensed up. She didn't like her maid interrupting her stage play. Her eyes narrowed. She wanted to assert her dominance. She needed to make it crystal clear, right in front of her audience, who the real queen of the castle was. She stood up abruptly, marched down the hallway where she had intentionally left a hamper overflowing with her dirty laundry from the last 3 days, and stomped back into the living room. She stood right in front of me, barely 3 feet away. Her friends watched the scene with wide eyes, practically eating popcorn. Brittany reached into the hamper and yanked out a wad of clothes. Without warning, without a single shred of human decency, she threw the bundle directly at my chest. The impact of the damp, foul-smelling fabric made me stumble half a step back. The clothes hit the floor with a dull thud. "Wash this, right now," Brittany snapped, raising her voice to ensure every single syllable bounced off the living room walls. Her tone was sharp, degrading, dripping with unprovoked cruelty. "I need that blouse for tomorrow, and scrub the sweatpants hard. That's why we give you a free roof in this house, so you can at least be useful for something. Don't think we're going to keep you around just for decoration." The silence that followed was absolute. The TV in the background kept muttering, but in the living room, time stopped. One of the friends let out a nervous little giggle, brought her wine glass to her lips, and looked away. The other one just stared a hole through me, waiting to see if the fragile old lady was going to cry, beg, or have a total nervous breakdown. I didn't do any of those things. I kept my eyes locked on Brittany's face. I saw the arrogance in her tilted chin, the challenge in her dark eyes, the desperate need for validation hiding right behind her cruelty. She wanted me to react. She wanted me to scream at her so she could turn to her friends and say, "Look, I told you. She's crazy. She's unbearable." If I had exploded, I would have handed her the exact ammunition she needed to justify her behavior to my son and to the rest of the world. But I am a strategist. I have survived grinding poverty, back-breaking labor, a spiritually absent husband, and the crushing disappointment of a weak son. A spoiled little girl playing house wasn't going to break me with a pile of dirty laundry. I didn't say a single word. My face betrayed absolutely zero emotion. Slowly, with the deliberate, measured pacing of my 68 years, I bent my knees. The popping of my joints was the only sound in the room. I reached out with my rough hands and picked up the stained silk blouse, the sweatpants that reeked of body odor, and the socks. I pressed them against my apron. I stood back up, keeping my spine perfectly straight, never breaking eye contact with Brittany. Her haughty smirk faltered for a fraction of a second when confronted with my dead silence, with the absolute lack of submission in my eyes. There was no defeat in my stare. There was a death sentence. I turned around. I walked past the friends who pulled their legs back like they were terrified my presence might infect them with some disease. I walked down the hardwood hallway. Behind me, I heard Brittany's exaggerated, dramatic sigh. "Oh my God, you really have to show them who's boss," she scoffed, her voice regaining its swagger now that my back was turned. "It's like dealing with toddlers. Anyway, pour some more wine, girls." The laughter erupted again, filling my house with a mocking echo that embedded itself in the drywall. I walked all the way to the end of the hall, cutting through the kitchen until I reached the laundry room. The cold tile floor beneath my feet helped center my thoughts. I flicked on the fluorescent light. I looked at the whitewashing machine I had bought with my own savings 3 years ago. I looked at the detergent, the fabric softener, the scrubbing brushes, and then my eyes drifted to the right corner of the room. Sitting there, neatly folded in a stack, were the black trash bags, heavy-duty, industrial-grade plastic bags I used for clearing out yard waste and thorny weeds. The clock had started ticking. The indignity had hit its absolute ceiling, and the debt had just been tallied. I dropped Brittany's clothes onto the closed lid of the washing machine. The smell of sweat and cheap perfume filled the cramped space. I walked over to the corner, grabbed one of the thick black bags, and snapped it open with a sharp flick of my wrists. The crack of the plastic echoed like a gunshot in the laundry room. I shoved the silk blouse inside. I shoved the sweatpants inside. I shoved the socks inside. But I didn't stop there. The decision was made. The machine was in motion, and there was no force on this earth that could make me back down. I pulled the laundry room door shut behind me, making sure the latch clicked firmly into place, locking out the noise from the living room, ready to execute the opening move of the endgame. The thick, heavy plastic of the industrial bag crinkled between my rough fingers as I opened it all the way. I didn't stop with the makeup-stained silk blouse, or the rancid sweatpants, or the socks Brittany had thrown at my chest with the sheer arrogance of someone who thinks they're untouchable. My eyes scanned the small laundry room and locked onto the overflowing wicker hamper my daughter-in-law had dragged in that very morning. It was a mountain of negligence and vanity. There were designer jeans with rhinestones on the pockets, tight dresses that smelled like cigarette smoke in nightclubs, lace underwear that she always demanded I hand wash with neutral soap, and fine knit sweaters she left dumped in every corner of my house. All of it was sitting right there, waiting for my 68-year-old hands, the exact same hands that had mixed the concrete for the foundation of this property, to restore the cleanliness that its owner lacked on the inside. I grabbed the wicker hamper by the handles and dumped it straight into the black bag. The clothes cascaded down, mixing with the dust and dried leaves left over at the bottom of the plastic. I didn't feel angry. Anger is a hot, reckless emotion that makes your hands shake and clouds your judgment. What I felt was absolute clarity, cold and sharp as broken glass. I shoved my arms deep into the bag and pushed the clothes down hard, compacting the fabric to make more room. I grabbed a second bag from the shelf and did the exact same thing with the coats and jackets hanging carelessly on the rack by the back door. Clothes Brittany hoarded out there, complaining that the closets in the guest room were way too small for her wardrobe. I tied off the ends of both bags with tight blind knots, pulling the plastic until my knuckles turned white. They were heavy. They weighed almost as much as 2 years of silent humiliations, of unpaid utility bills, of dirty dishes abandoned on my counter, and of blatant disrespect in front of house guests. But my back, trained to carry rolls of heavy leather and solid wood frames for decades in the upholstery shop, didn't bow. I dragged the first bag across the tile floor to the side door that opened out to the paved alley, and then went back for the second one. The wall clock in the kitchen read 4:35 p.m. In my neighborhood, the municipal garbage truck runs on an ironclad schedule on Thursdays. It rolls through at exactly 4:40 p.m., announcing its arrival with the deep, throaty roar of a diesel engine and the sharp squeal of air brakes. I kicked the side door open with a solid thud. The afternoon sun hit my face, illuminating the dust particles floating in the air. In the distance, just 2 blocks away, I heard the unmistakable sound of the truck turning the corner. I dragged the bags out to the concrete curb I had leveled myself 20 years ago. I stood right at the edge of the street, smoothed my apron over my stomach, and waited. The massive green and white vehicle hissed to a halt right in front of my house. Hanging off the back, gripping the metal rail with the casual familiarity of a lifetime, was Frank. Frank is a sun-leathered guy with broad shoulders and an easy smile who's been working these streets for 15 years. He knows every single neighbor. He knows who recycles, who sneaks construction rubble into their bins, and who brings him an ice-cold glass of water in the dead of summer. I always had a pitcher of lemonade waiting for him in July, and sweetbread in December. In working-class neighborhoods, loyalty isn't signed on paper. It's built on daily respect. Frank hopped down onto the curb, wiping the sweat off his forehead with his forearm. When he saw me standing there next to 2 massive, bulging bags, he raised a thick eyebrow. "Afternoon, Miss Dorothy," he said, walking up to the pile. "Wow, looks like you decided to do some serious spring cleaning today. Clearing out the attic? These bags weigh like they've got rocks inside." "Good afternoon, Frank," I replied, my voice as steady and monotone as the truck's engine. "It's not the attic. It's just accumulated garbage. Things that don't serve any purpose anymore, taking up space and attracting pests. I needed to get them out of my house once and for all." Frank nodded without asking another question. That's the beauty of hardworking people. They understand that sometimes you carry dead weight that just needs to be thrown out. No explanations required. He grabbed the knot of the first bag, bent his knees, and heaved it straight into the steel jaws of the truck's hopper with a grunt of effort. Then he did the exact same thing with the second one. The silk blouse, the exclusive jeans, the lace underwear, all of it landed on a filthy mattress of organic waste, soggy cardboard, and rotting food scraps from the entire neighborhood. "Hit it, kid," Frank yelled to the driver, slapping the side of the truck with an open palm. I stood right there, frozen on the curb, and watched. The hydraulic mechanism roared to life with a deep mechanical whine. The massive steel crusher plate came down without mercy, trapping the black bags. The thick plastic held out for a fraction of a second before violently bursting under the colossal pressure. Through the jagged rip, I watched the shiny silk of the blouse Brittany needed for tomorrow irreversibly tangle with wet coffee grounds and rotting fruit peels. I watched the machine shred, crush, and swallow her entire wardrobe, dragging it deep into the dark belly of the compactor until there was absolutely nothing left. In that moment, the sound of tearing fabric and crushing metal was the most beautiful symphony I had heard in years. "All set, Miss Dorothy," Frank said, swinging back up onto the metal rail. "Have a great afternoon, and take care of yourself." "You're looking a little pale." "I'm perfectly fine, Frank. Better than ever," I answered, and it was the absolute truth. The truck roared away, taking the first installment of the debt with it, leaving behind a sharp smell of diesel exhaust that I inhaled deeply into my lungs. I walked back into the house through the side door and slid the deadbolt locked. From the end of the hallway, the echoes of Brittany's shrill laughter and her friends' voices still spilled out of my living room, completely oblivious to the execution that had just taken place mere yards away. I didn't go toward them. I walked in silence to my bedroom, the master suite, at the far end of the opposite hallway. I opened the door and locked it behind me. The room was cast in shadows, drowning in that dusty stillness that old marriages settle into when love is entirely replaced by habit and exhaustion. Thomas wasn't there. He was probably still hiding in the furthest corner of the backyard, tuning his radio so he wouldn't have to hear the world crashing down. I walked straight to the heavy oak closet that took up the entire left wall. I pushed aside the thick winter coats that smelled of mothballs and pressed my hand against the wooden back panel. It gave way with a soft click, revealing the small wall safe cemented into the foundation. I spun the steel dial. 4, 17, 31. The metal door swung open smoothly. Inside, protected inside a clear plastic folder, rested the original deed to the property. I pulled it out and sat on the edge of the bed, clicking on the nightstand lamp. I ran my fingers over the stamped paper, feeling the raised texture of the signatures and official seals. The document was in my name, exclusively my name, Dorothy Carmen Salazar. When we bought this lot, Thomas had insisted on doing it that way. Back then, he worked at the lumber mill, surrounded by massive saw blades and lethal machinery. One day, a coworker of his lost an arm. Another lost his life, crushed by pine logs. The sheer terror of leaving me destitute if he died in a workplace accident pushed him to put the only asset we had under my absolute control. As the decades dragged on, Thomas forgot about that legal detail, just assuming that marriage automatically turned everything into a blurred, shared asset. Jason, our son, grew up believing the house was the guaranteed inheritance of the patriarch, and Brittany, in her infinite arrogance, assumed that by manipulating Jason and dominating Thomas, she already had the keys to the castle in her pocket. Not a single one of them remembered that in the eyes of the state, this dirt, these bricks, and this roof belonged only to me. I slipped the deed into my black leather purse, right next to my ID and the paid water and power bills funded by my retirement check. I took off my orthopedic house shoes. I slipped on a pair of closed-toe street shoes. I fixed my gray hair in the vanity mirror, and I walked out of the room. I walked down the hall, stepping carefully to keep the floorboards from creaking. I passed the living room without looking inside. I only heard the clinking of wine glasses and my daughter-in-law's voice saying, "The poor thing just can't coordinate anymore, girls." I gave her a blouse to wash and she probably fell asleep in the kitchen. I walked out the front door, pulling it shut in absolute silence. Attorney Arthur Vance's office was 15 blocks away, on a tree-lined avenue where old neighborhood shops blended with modern bank branches. Arthur wasn't just a respected notary and lawyer. He was an ally of a breed that barely exists anymore. He had known my family since before Jason was even born. He was the one who drafted the purchase contracts for the lot, the one who advised me when I wanted to make my little upholstery business official, and the one who watched my hands go from soft to covered in thick, hard-earned scars. I arrived at his office at 5:15 p.m. The brass bell above the glass door announced my entry. The smell of old paper, fresh coffee, and floor wax wrapped around me instantly, offering me a sense of order and legality that my own home had completely lost. Arthur was sitting behind his mahogany desk, adjusting his thick-rimmed glasses as he read through a file. When he looked up and recognized me, a genuine smile lit up his deeply lined face. But the smile vanished the second he noticed the rigid set of my jaw and the way I was clutching my purse against my chest. "Dorothy," he said, standing up immediately. "What a surprise. Come in, please. Sit down. Is something wrong? Is Thomas okay?" I opened my purse, pulled out the clear plastic folder, and slid it across the polished surface of his desk. "Thomas is alive, Arthur. Whether he's okay is another story. But he's breathing," I replied, my tone stripped of any emotional decoration. "I'm here because I need to initiate what we discussed hypothetically the last time I came in for a consultation. I need the official document, Arthur. You explained to me that since my son and his wife don't pay rent, don't have a lease agreement, and don't contribute to the structural expenses, the law views them as occupants by my tolerance. As the sole registered owner, I have the absolute right to revoke that tolerance and demand the eviction of the property. I want it in writing, with stamps and signatures, that their permission to inhabit my property is officially revoked. I want the document to establish a strict, non-negotiable legal deadline of 30 days for them to empty the house, remove their belongings, and hand over the keys. And I want it made crystal clear that if they don't, we will proceed with law enforcement." Arthur was a man of the law, but he also knew the heavy weight of human pain. "Dorothy, listen to me very carefully," he warned in a soft voice, leaning across the desk. "I will draft whatever you ask me to. My duty and my loyalty are to you, but I want you to fully understand the consequences of crossing this line. Jason is your son. If you hand him an eviction notice signed by a notary, the fracture will be permanent. There's no going back. Your daughter-in-law will use this to turn him against you forever. Are you absolutely certain you want to start this war?" I thought about my banished flower pots, my rejected cooking, my life reduced to indentured servitude inside the very house I built. "I'm not the one starting the war, Arthur. The war started the day I handed them the keys to my house, and they decided I was just an annoying piece of old furniture," I answered, my voice ringing metallic and final. "The fabric is already cut. All that's left is to stitch the seam. Draft the document. I will pay your fee in cash right now." He called his assistant in, dictated the precise terms, cited the corresponding articles of the Civil Code, and 40 minutes later, he placed 3 copies of an official, stamped and numbered document bearing his firm's letterhead on the desk in front of me. I signed every single page with a rock-steady hand. The stroke of my pen was fast, dark, and final. I tucked the copies into my purse. I shook Arthur's hand goodbye and walked back out onto the street. The afternoon air was starting to cool, but I felt a clean, controlled fire burning in my chest. The walk back home felt shorter. When I slid the key into the front door lock, the silence that greeted me was thick and sticky. Brittany's friends had already left. I stepped into the entryway and walked toward the living room. The scene was desolate. There were lipstick-stained wine glasses scattered across the end tables, dried-out sushi scraps sitting on the ceramic platters I had washed, crumpled napkins on the floor, and throw pillows tossed everywhere. The smell of cheap perfume and alcohol hung heavy in the air. From the end of the hallway, I heard Brittany's frantic footsteps. She burst out of the guest room, violently slamming drawers open and shut. She was wearing a pair of shorts and a basic t-shirt. Her hair was a mess, and her face, completely stripped of the arrogant smirk she wore just hours ago, showed a rising panic mixed with utter confusion. When she saw me standing in the doorway of the living room, she stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes went wide. "Dorothy!" she yelled, completely forgetting the condescending tone she used in front of her audience. "Where the hell are my clothes? I went to the laundry room and the washer is empty. The hamper is gone. My jackets aren't on the rack by the door. Where did you put them? I need that silk blouse for a dinner tonight." "I did exactly what you asked," I answered. My voice was calm, almost monotone, slicing right through the chaos she was projecting. "You said the house smelled like poor people food, that we needed to maintain a standard for your friends. I noticed there was a lot of garbage piling up, attracting a bad smell and cluttering the common areas. I just maintained the standard, like you said we needed to." I took advantage of the fact that the city garbage truck was passing by. There was over $1,000 worth of clothes in that hamper. Tell me this is a sick joke. Tell me you hid them in your room. By now, they should be pressed under several tons of garbage at the South landfill. In that exact moment, the rattle of the side door lock interrupted us. Jason walked into the house, wearing his gray logistics supervisor uniform, hauling his heavy work backpack. He stopped at the end of the hallway, taking in the scene with exhausted, alarmed eyes. "What's going on? Why are you screaming like that, Brittany?" my son asked, dropping his bag on the floor and rushing toward her. Brittany threw herself into his arms, sobbing with a theatricality that would have been hilarious if it wasn't so pathetic. She buried her face in Jason's chest, pointing a trembling finger at me over his shoulder. "Your mother is crazy, Jason. She's completely lost her mind," she shrieked, choking on manufactured tears. "She grabbed all my dirty laundry, my silk blouses, my jeans, my jackets, and threw them into the garbage truck. She left me with nothing. I told you she's losing it, that she does things out of pure malice because she hates us. Look at what she did." Jason stopped 3 feet away from me, invading my personal space, trying to use his height to intimidate me, just like he had watched his wife do so many times. "Mom, tell me this isn't true," Jason demanded, his voice tight, his fists clenched at his sides. "Did you really throw her clothes in the trash? What the hell is wrong with you? Brittany gave them to you to wash. We give you company, we take care of you, and you pull this stupid stunt? You are going to pay her back for every single cent of what you threw away. You're going to take money out of your retirement check and buy her new clothes tomorrow morning." I looked at him. I only saw a coward demanding my surrender to buy his own domestic peace. An exact echo of his father, who was currently still hiding out in the backyard. "I am not paying a single red cent, Jason," I said. My voice dropped an octave, turning dense and dangerous. "Your wife threw her dirty laundry in my face in front of total strangers and told me that's why you give me a free roof in this house. Maybe Brittany is right," Jason threatened, his voice dropping an octave, turning dense and dangerous. "Maybe you need a medical evaluation, or maybe it's time for me to take total control of the house, and you retire to rest." Brittany, standing at the end of the hall, nodded vigorously, wiping her tears, but never breaking her gaze of pure hatred toward me. I let the silence settle into the living room. I let my son's threat bounce off the walls I had built, seep into the furniture I had upholstered. I slowly raised my right hand and rested it on the black leather of my purse, feeling the hard edge of the notary folder inside. My fingers brushed the flap. Jason was waiting for an apology, the weeping of a terrified old woman, a plea for forgiveness so she wouldn't be shipped off to a nursing home or shoved into a dark corner under his new administration. I gave him none of that. I sketched the faintest of smiles, an imperceptible curve at the corner of my lips that never reached my eyes. "Clear rules," I repeated, tasting my son's words, feeling the heavy weight of the document that was about to flip the course of history. "You're absolutely right, Jason. We need very clear rules about who is giving a roof to whom." I pressed my purse against my body, knowing the chessboard had just been flipped completely, and took a step forward. I walked right past him without brushing his arm. My left shoulder was millimeters from Jason's puffed-out chest, but I didn't step back a single inch, nor did I speed up my pace. The hardwood floor creaked under my closed-toe shoes, tapping out a steady, methodical rhythm, identical to an industrial sewing machine punching through layers of thick leather. Behind me, my son's stunned silence and my daughter-in-law's theatrical sobbing crashed uselessly against my straight back. I felt Jason's hand reach out to grab my arm, a clumsy instinct for physical dominance, but it stopped dead in midair. The energy I was radiating in that moment wasn't the energy of a mother ready to negotiate. It was the energy of a landlord walking through her own domain. I kept my right hand tightly gripped on my purse strap, feeling the stiffness of the manila envelope through the black leather. That piece of paper was the blade of the scissors. I just needed to measure the fabric one last time before making the final cut. I reached my bedroom door. I turned the brass knob, stepped inside, and locked it behind me. The metallic click echoed with absolute finality. The room was bathed in the bluish twilight of dusk. On the bed, under a woven wool blanket, Thomas was fast asleep, or at least faking it with the mastery of a man who has spent half a century running away from reality. The air smelled like his eucalyptus joint ointment and the dust trapped in the heavy curtains that Brittany despised so much. I sat on the edge of the mattress without turning on the lamp. I slowly took off my shoes, feeling the dull throb in my swollen ankles. The adrenaline was starting to drain from my bloodstream, leaving behind a mental clarity so cold it almost hurt to breathe. I stared at my husband's motionless silhouette, and my mind drifted backward, pulled out by the tide of memory. It was the winter of 1994. Jason was 17, and the whole world felt too small for him. One Friday night, he snuck out the neighbor's car, an old sedan the man used to work as a cab driver, and smashed it into a light pole 3 blocks from here. The neighbor, desperate and furious, threatened to call the cops and ruin my son's life if we didn't pay for the damages immediately. Thomas, true to his nature, locked himself in the bathroom and cried, saying we were ruined. I was the one who went down to the upholstery shop that very same dawn. I was the one who took on an urgent, horribly underpaid job to reupholster all the booths for a roadside diner. I remember the sharp, stinging smell of industrial glue, the red dust of polyurethane foam floating in the basement air. I worked for 72 hours straight. My fingers split open. The curved needle drove right through the pad of my right thumb, leaving a dark blood stain on the red vinyl of one of the seats. I paid Jason's debt, bill by bill. When I handed him the receipt from the auto shop, my son didn't even say thank you. He just grabbed his jacket and went out to play football with his friends, relieved that his stupidity had 0 consequences. At the time, I thought I was protecting him. I thought that kind of sacrifice was the highest expression of a mother's love. Today, sitting in the dark in my bedroom, I realized the sheer magnitude of my mistake. Blind love doesn't raise strong men, it manufactures cowardly tyrants. I taught Jason that there would always be someone willing to bleed to clean up his messes. And now, he expected me to keep bleeding to keep his wife's fantasy completely intact. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the armchair by the window, watching the darkness slowly dissolve into the gray tones of dawn. At 7 in the morning, I heard noises in the kitchen, rushed footsteps, the clinking of coffee mugs, tense whispers. Jason hadn't gone to work. I put on my clean apron. I brushed my gray hair, pulling it back into a tight bun at the nape of my neck. I grabbed my purse with the document inside, and I walked out into the hallway. When I stepped into the kitchen, the scene waiting for me confirmed my suspicions that Jason had decided to execute his threat from the night before. Sitting at the head of my oak table, with a steaming mug of tea between her hands, was a woman in her 50s, wearing an impeccable tailored suit and wire-rimmed glasses. On the table in front of her rested a leather briefcase and an open notepad. Jason was standing by the fridge with his arms crossed and a deep scowl, while Brittany sat next to the stranger, rubbing her eyes with a tissue in a pathetic attempt to simulate crying. "Mom," Jason said the second I crossed the threshold, his voice loaded with a fake compassion that made my stomach turn. "I'm so glad you're up. This is Dr. Elena Hayes. She's a psychiatrist specializing in geriatrics. I asked her to come see you after the incident with the clothes yesterday. You looked at me with empty eyes, like you didn't even recognize me. Living like this is torture. We're terrified that one day you'll leave the gas on or hurt Dad. With a diagnosis of senile dementia, he could initiate a legal guardianship process, declare me incompetent to manage my own assets, and consequently seize absolute control of the house. It was a cowardly coup d'etat, using medicine as a weapon. I walked over to the coffee maker, grabbed my white ceramic mug, and poured myself some black coffee. My hands didn't shake. The dark liquid fell in a perfect silent stream. I turned around, leaned my hip against the counter, and looked the psychiatrist dead in the eyes. "Dr. Hayes," I finally spoke. My voice rang out clear, steady, and completely devoid of any emotional distress. "I understand your position. You were called in for an emergency, paid for a house call, and fed a family tragedy. If you'd like, you can run whatever cognitive tests you deem necessary. Have me count backward from 100 by sevens. Ask me to memorize 3 words. Ask me who the president is or what year we're in. I am completely at your disposal. But first, I suggest you ask my son and my daughter-in-law to leave my kitchen. Medical evaluations require privacy, don't they?" She looked at Jason, then at Brittany, and finally gave a slow nod. "You are absolutely right, Miss Dorothy," the psychiatrist said, clicking her pen shut. "Jason, Brittany, please wait for us in the living room. I need to speak with your mother alone." "Please, step out," the doctor ordered, this time with a firmness that left no room for argument. Jason clenched his jaw, glaring daggers at me, and marched out of the kitchen, dragging Brittany by the elbow. I listened to their footsteps fade down the hallway into the living room. Once silence reclaimed the room, I walked over to the table and sat in the chair opposite Dr. Hayes. I placed my leather purse squarely on my lap. "All right, Miss Dorothy," the psychiatrist started, opening her notepad. "Do you know what day it is today? You are here because my son Jason, who works as a logistics route supervisor and has a long track record of financial failures, desperately needs a legal excuse to strip me of my property. And regarding the clothing incident yesterday, there was no disorientation. Your daughter-in-law claims I threw away clean, expensive clothes for absolutely no reason. Yesterday afternoon, in front of two of her friends, she pulled a makeup-stained silk blouse, sweatpants that reeked of stale body odor, and dirty socks out of a hamper. She threw the wad directly at my chest and ordered me to wash it immediately, adding verbatim the phrase, 'That's why we give you a free roof in this house.' I didn't scream, I didn't cry, and I didn't lose my memory. I simply picked up the clothes, went to the laundry room, shoved absolutely every single piece of her hoarded clothing into 2 black industrial trash bags. I dragged them out to the curb and waited patiently for the municipal garbage truck to pass by at 4:40 p.m. I watched the machine shred the clothes. It was a deliberate, calculated, and fully conscious act of deep cleaning. I sleep exactly as much as I need to. I eat what I cook myself, because my daughter-in-law only orders takeout and leaves the dirty containers right on this exact table for me to clean up. I fired back, unzipping my purse. I pulled out a small black notebook, my meticulous ledger from the last 2 years. I slid it across the table right into the doctor's hands. "There are the accounts, Dr. Hayes. Dates, amounts, invoice numbers. I have spent a year and a half paying 100% of the electricity, water, gas, and internet for this house, out of my retirement pension. My son and my daughter-in-law don't contribute a single dime, yet they receive online shopping packages weekly. Jason makes enough to rent an apartment, but Brittany prefers to live here, treating me like her free live-in maid, because it allows her to maintain a lifestyle they simply cannot afford. I am not crazy, doctor. I have just stopped being docile." She reviewed the receipts stapled to the back pages. The silence in the kitchen grew thick, loaded with the crushing weight of hard evidence. The doctor closed the notebook and handed it back to me. There was a mix of respect and pity in her eyes, the exact kind of look a professional reserves for the survivor of a prolonged shipwreck. "Miss Dorothy," the psychiatrist said, snapping her briefcase shut, "you possess an enviable lucidity. Your orientation in time, space, and person is flawless. Your short-term and long-term memory are completely intact, and your capacity for judgment and reasoning is superior to most people your age. What you are suffering from is not dementia, it is financial and psychological abuse. Because of this, I am taking action. I will be charging them the maximum penalty rate for an unjustified house call. And if you ever need a medical testimony for a legal proceeding, my card is on the table." The notary's office had been downtown, a gloomy place that smelled like dark tobacco and damp paper. The clacking of mechanical typewriters filled the air. Thomas was sitting next to me, his sawdust-covered work boots staining the marble floor. His hands were shaking. That very same day, at the lumber yard, a bandsaw had snapped, amputating 3 fingers from the foreman right in front of his eyes. The sheer terror of death, of sudden invalidity, had shattered whatever little faith Thomas had in the future. When the notary slid the deed for the lot we had just bought across the desk, Thomas backed away. "Put it all in her name," my husband said, his voice cracking. "Only in Dorothy's name. If the saw takes my hand, the mill's lawyers will strip us of everything, so they don't have to pay the pension. Let the house be yours, Dot, just yours. That way nobody can ever touch it." I picked up the pen. My signature was firm, dark, and final. Thomas's cowardice, his pathological fear of conflict and disaster, was paradoxically the very thing that granted me the most impenetrable legal shield a woman of my generation could ever ask for. He did it out of fear. I accepted it as a blood pact, a pact that my son, in his absolute arrogance, knew nothing about. Dr. Hayes stood up, ripped the invoice from her receipt book, and walked toward the kitchen door. I followed a few steps behind her. When we reached the hallway, Jason and Brittany stood up from the living room sofa with expressions of anxious expectation. Jason quickly stepped forward, reaching out to receive what he truly believed was my civil death sentence. So, doctor, my son asked, trying to sound heartbroken, how severe is the progression of the dementia? Do we need to commit her? Using emergency psychiatric services in an attempt to incapacitate a family member over cohabitation conflicts is a severe ethical violation. My fee for this visit is $200. I suggest you wire it to me before noon. Good day. His eyes scanned the lines written by the doctor, and I watched the blood drain entirely from his face, rapidly replaced by an ugly red flush of pure rage creeping up his neck. Brittany, peering over his shoulder, read the certificate and clenched her fists at her sides. Her master plan had completely crumbled in less than 20 minutes. If she's not crazy, then she's just doing it out of pure evil, Brittany hissed, her voice trembling with rage, instantly dropping the concerned daughter-in-law act. I told you, Jason. She's a bitter old hag who hates me. She threw my clothes in the trash knowing exactly what she was doing. She humiliated me on purpose. There was zero trace left of the son I had once rocked to sleep. Standing in front of me was a man backed into a corner by his own mediocrity, desperate to establish dominance. All right, Mom, if you want to play sane and start a war in this house, we're going to play by my rules, Jason declared, pointing his index finger just inches from my nose. As of right now, things change. Since you're so healthy, you can start packing your stuff. This Sunday, Brittany's parents are coming over for lunch. They're driving in from out of town, and they're going to stay for a couple of weeks to help us get financially organized. We are giving them your bedroom, the master suite. You are moving into the sewing room at the back. It's small, but it's enough for you. We are taking control of the administration of this house because you clearly don't know how to live like a family. You have until Sunday morning to empty your closets. If you don't do it, I will, and I'll throw your crap in the yard. Understand? They wanted to banish me from my own bedroom, the room I shared with my husband for 40 years, just to install Brittany's parents like the new monarchs of a conquered territory. It was the final nail in the coffin, the absolute confirmation that, to Jason, I was no longer a mother, but a physical obstacle that needed to be removed and shoved into a dark corner. While I listened to him dictate my banishment, the third memory hit me with the crack of a whip. It was the night they showed up at my door looking for shelter, the torrential rain hammering the living room windows, Brittany soaked, shivering, clutching her designer suitcase, Jason crying at the kitchen table. It'll just be for a few months, Mom, he had said. I swear we won't be a burden. We'll respect your space, your routine. We just need a place to drop dead until the storm passes. We're begging you. And Brittany, looking at me with those big puppy dog eyes, had added, You are an angel, Miss Dorothy. We will never forget this. This is your house, and we will be completely invisible. I looked at my son's index finger threatening me. Then I looked at Brittany, who was smiling with sheer superiority from the end of the hall, actually believing her husband's brute force had finally broken me. I didn't move a single muscle in my face. I showed no pain, no outrage, no fear. Slowly, with the exact same measured pace I used to thread a needle in the shop, I nodded. Sunday, I repeated, my voice sounding hollow and accommodating, a velvet trap laid over a pit of spikes. Sunday sounds like an excellent day to make permanent changes to the administration of this house. Don't worry, Jason. By lunchtime on Sunday, everything will be exactly where it belongs. We want them to feel like they own the place. I polished the hardwood floors until they reflected the sunlight like mirrors. I washed the living room curtains. I vacuumed every single corner. I waxed the dining room table. Jason and Brittany watched me from the periphery, smiling smugly, assuming my cleaning frenzy was me accepting my new role as the permanent maid for their extended family. Thomas, sensing the electric tension in the air, spent the entire weekend locked inside the tool shed, running away from the incoming cataclysm. Sunday morning, I woke up at dawn. I prepared the biggest, most expensive cut of short ribs I could find at the neighborhood butcher. I diced garlic, onions, and bell peppers, creating a marinade that filled the whole house with a thick, festive aroma. I threw together fresh salads, baked homemade bread, and brought out my best porcelain dinnerware, the set I only ever used for Christmas. I set the dining table with a white linen tablecloth, lining up the silver cutlery with millimeter precision. Right in the center of the table, right next to the main platter of steaming meat, I placed a small wicker bread basket, completely empty. At 12:30 p.m., I walked into my bedroom. I opened my leather purse. I pulled out the manila envelope containing the 3 original copies of the notarized eviction notice, signed, sealed, and dated by attorney Arthur Vance, stipulating the strict, non-negotiable legal deadline of 30 days for Jason and Brittany to vacate my property due to the revocation of a precarious loan agreement. The paper felt heavy, loaded with the force of 40 years of sweat and scars. I folded the envelope in half and slipped it into the deep front pocket of my white apron, pressing it against my stomach. The front doorbell rang exactly at 1 p.m. I heard Brittany's high-pitched squeals of excitement echoing down the hall, the click of the deadbolt unlocking, and the booming voices of her parents flooding the entryway. "Oh, what a gorgeous house, honey," exclaimed the raspy voice of Brittany's mother. "Jason told me you guys are finally taking full control of the place. It's about time you got the space you deserve." I took a deep breath, savoring the smell of roasted meat and betrayal, and walked slowly toward the dining room, ready to serve them the main course. The smell of roasted meat, crispy garlic, and rosemary flooded the room, instantly mixing with the sickeningly sweet perfume Brittany's mother had bathed in. The scene unfolding around my oak table, the very table I had bought secondhand and restored, sanding the wood down until my fingerprints were practically gone, was the graphic representation of a completed invasion. Robert, my daughter-in-law's father, had planted himself at the head of the table, taking the exact chair Thomas had occupied for 40 years. He was a bulky man, with a red face and a booming voice, wearing a ridiculously shiny gold watch on his left wrist. Sitting to his right was Connie, his wife, a woman who shared Brittany's desperate need to fake a status she didn't possess, dripping in heavy costume jewelry and sporting hair stiff with hairspray. Jason and Brittany took the side seats, smiling with the smugness of 2 monarchs presenting their kingdom to a visiting royal court. Not a single person stood up to help me carry the 10-pound platter. Nobody even made the gesture of moving the crystal glasses to make room for me. I walked with my spine straight, my closed-toe shoes muffling my footsteps against the polished wood, and set the steaming meat dead center on the white linen tablecloth, right next to the wicker bread basket I had intentionally left empty. "Wow, smells pretty good," Robert commented, leaning over the table to inhale the steam from the ribs, without even glancing my way. "Jason told me the home cooking around here was a little basic, but this actually looks decent. Pass me the big knife, son. I'll take care of carving. In my house, the man of the family always serves the meat. And pop open that red wine I bought last week, the one with the black label." I didn't change my expression. I simply turned around and walked toward the kitchen. As I uncorked the bottle of wine on the counter, the echo of their conversation reached my ears with insulting clarity. "It's a fantastic property, Jason. Seriously, congratulations," Robert's raspy voice echoed. "Brittany mentioned you guys made a smart investment keeping this house, but I had no idea the layout was this huge. With a good remodel, this place is going to be worth a fortune in a couple of years. You definitely need to modernize it, though. That dark wood is so out of style." "Yeah, Jason and I have been talking about knocking down the wall between the living room and the hallway to do an open concept," Brittany chimed in. "And well, now that you guys are here, we're going to start by fixing up the master bedroom. The natural light from that big window is perfect for you, Mom. Jason already decided you guys are taking that room for as long as you need. It's the absolute least we can do to make sure you're comfortable while you help us with the kids when we decide to have them. At her age, old people get a little too attached to their stuff. Plus, it's time that we, the ones bringing the vitality and the future to this family, take the reins of the administration. She just needs to rest and, well, help us out with the light kitchen chores. Like today." The weight of the manila envelope in my apron pocket was a cold anchor against my stomach, keeping me firmly grounded in reality while they floated away in their bubble of lies. I started pouring the wine into the glasses. First Robert, then Connie. The dark red liquid splashed down with a steady liquid sound, staining the immaculate crystal. The lie they had spun was colossal. Jason and Brittany hadn't just physically hijacked my house. They had constructed an entire fictional narrative for their guests. They made them believe they were the owners, the providers, the magnanimous benefactors who were allowing Jason's elderly mother to live under their roof out of pure charity. They had completely erased my 40 years of labor. They hid the fact that my pension paid for the lights shining down on them and the water they were drinking. They had reduced me to the role of a domestic burden who should be grateful for the crumbs of their supposed generosity. "Thanks, Dorothy," You can just leave the bottle right there, Connie told me, waving a hand without making eye contact, using that condescending tone pretentious women reserve for the hired help. And please, make sure the guest bathroom has fresh towels. I'd like to freshen up a bit after we eat. Robert had already carved the meat and was slopping massive portions onto the porcelain plates. The fat sizzled softly. The banquet was at its absolute peak of opulence, a feast funded entirely by my own wallet to celebrate my own banishment. I stood a few feet away from the table, my hands clasped over my apron. Jason picked up his fork, but before he could stab his first piece of meat, he turned to me. The moment he considered the grand finale of his victory had arrived, his official coronation in front of his new court. "All right, Mom," Jason started, wiping the corner of his mouth with his linen napkin. "Since we're all gathered here, and like we agreed on Friday, I think this is the perfect time to make the changes official. My in-laws are exhausted from the drive, and they're going to want to get settled into the master bedroom right after lunch to rest. I need you to hand over the keys to your room right now, and please tell me you already cleared your stuff out of the closets, because I really don't want Brittany dealing with your old clothes this afternoon." Robert and Connie stared at me, fully expecting to see a defeated old woman meekly handing over the keys to her castle. Brittany smiled from behind her wine glass, her eyes gleaming with victorious malice. She was savoring every single second of my public humiliation, drinking in the revenge for the clothes the garbage truck had shredded 3 days ago. I didn't move. I kept my breathing steady, feeling the rhythmic thud of my heart echoing in my ears. I slowly slid my right hand into the deep front pocket of my white apron. My calloused fingers, trained to find a needle in the dark, brushed the edge of the manila envelope. "Did you hear me, Mom?" Jason insisted, raising his voice, his tone taking on a sharp, aggressive edge. His authority was being questioned in front of his audience, and his fragile ego couldn't handle the delay. "I asked for the keys to the master bedroom. Give them to me right now, and I am not giving up my room. Do you want to make a scene in front of my in-laws? Do you want me to call Dr. Hayes again and tell her you're having another psychotic episode? I told you the changes were happening today, and in this house, what I say goes. You've been living inside an illusion so deep you actually ended up believing your own lie. And what's worse, you dragged your guests right into that same fantasy." I pulled out the 3 copies of the notarized eviction notice, perfectly stapled, stamped with attorney Arthur Vance's blue letterhead, and bearing my signature on the very last page. I took the first copy and, with a firm flick of my wrist, slid it across the linen tablecloth, stopping it right next to Jason's plate. I took the second copy and placed it squarely in front of Brittany. The third copy I kept in my hand. "What is this?" Jason stammered, looking down at the document. "A list of complaints? An inventory? Mom, I am not in the mood for your passive-aggressive games." I watched as the arrogance completely drained from his features, instantly replaced by a cadaverous pallor. His pupils dilated. His hands started to shake, making the thick paper rattle with a pathetic vibrating sound. This is a forgery," my son stuttered, his voice losing all the artificial bass he had faked just minutes before. "This isn't valid. It's just some paper you printed off the internet." As his eyes scanned down the legal paragraphs, his face morphed from confusion to sheer disbelief, and finally, to a dark, silent fury. "Can somebody explain to me what the hell this means?" Robert demanded, slapping the paper against the table with the back of his hand. His raspy voice boomed off the walls. He looked at Jason, then at Brittany. "It says right here, notice of revocation of precarious loan. It says Citizen Dorothy Carmen Salazar is the sole and exclusive owner of this property, and she is granting a strict, non-negotiable 30-day deadline for the occupants, Jason Salazar and Brittany Rojas, to vacate the premises." "What is this garbage, Jason? You told me this house was yours. You told me you bought it 3 years ago." Jason spun toward me, eyes wide, baring his teeth in a snarl of aggressive desperation. "You're crazy. My dad and you bought this house together. It's marital property. I have inheritance rights. You can't just throw me out on the street with some cheap lawyer's paper." The pity was completely gone, leaving only the cold, hard steel of justice. "Your father, in a panic attack 30 years ago, insisted the deed be put solely in my name to protect the asset from potential labor lawsuits," I explained, my voice ringing out clear and methodical, addressing not just Jason, but Brittany's parents as well. "In the eyes of the law, This dirt, these bricks, and this roof belong exclusively to me. You have no inheritance rights because I am not dead. And you have no squatter's rights because we never signed a lease. You have lived here purely on my tolerance, a tolerance that just expired. You made me tell the whole family you married some successful businessman who bought you a mansion, and it turns out you're just freeloading off your mother-in-law? What a humiliation, Brittany. What an absolute disgrace. Those were sobs of genuine panic, the raw reaction of a narcissist whose greatest fear, being exposed in front of her social circle, had just materialized in the most brutal way possible. It's all her fault, Mom, Brittany shrieked, pointing at me with shaking hands. She's a selfish old hag and she hates us. She's throwing us out on the street purely out of revenge because I didn't want to clean the kitchen a couple of times. I am throwing you out because you turned my house into a dumpster while pretending to be rich for your friends. And I am throwing you out because you let my son believe he could rob me of my peace and my dignity. I am truly sorry you were dragged into this charade, I said to Robert and Connie. You came here believing you were taking over a house that belonged to your son-in-law. The reality is that your son-in-law doesn't even own the silverware he was about to eat with. He makes enough to rent an apartment, but they chose to live here like parasites to fund the lifestyle your daughter demands and that he cannot afford. Shut your mouth, Jason roared, stopping less than 2 feet away from me. I am not going to let you humiliate me in my own house. I'm going to rip that paper into 1,000 pieces and lock you in that sewing room until you rot. You are not throwing me out on the street. Do you hear me? I am your son. I just looked him dead in the eyes, using silence as the most lethal weapon a disappointed mother can wield. I felt the tension in the air, Connie panicking and screaming her son-in-law's name, Brittany's jagged breathing. Jason had his fist raised, shaking in the air, but the empty, freezing, unbreakable stare I gave back totally paralyzed him. He knew, in the deepest depths of his cowardice, that if he laid a single finger on me, the police would drag him out in handcuffs before sunset. Slowly, Jason lowered his arm. His shoulders slumped. The rage gave way to the crushing realization of his own absolute impotence. He had no money for a legal battle. He didn't have the backing of his father, who was still hiding in some corner of the yard. And now, he had lost the respect of his in-laws. I folded the third copy of the notice, the one I had kept in my hand, and carefully tucked it into the front pocket of his gray work shirt, smoothing the fabric over his chest with 2 sharp, definitive pats. On Thursday afternoon, in front of your friends, I began, slowly turning my head to lock eyes with Brittany, who shrank down in her chair, as if my words had actual physical weight. You threw a stained blouse and a pair of reeking sweatpants right in my face. You demanded I wash them immediately, and you told me with an arrogance I will not forget as long as I live, that is why you give me a free roof in this house, so I could at least be useful for something. Connie covered her face with her hands. I shifted my attention back to Jason, who was staring down at the paper sticking out of his pocket like it was his own death warrant. The irony, Jason, is that she was right about the concept, but she got the recipient wrong, I whispered, my voice loaded with an absolute finality that echoed in the dead silence of the room. That is why I gave you a free roof for 2 years, so you could at least learn to respect the person feeding you. But since you didn't learn, the roof is gone. If there is a single shoe belonging to either of you on this property on day 31, Attorney Vance will arrive with a police cruiser and a court-ordered forced eviction. And I will personally throw your things out on the curb in black industrial trash bags. The front doorbell rang for a second time, a sharp, prolonged buzz that pierced the sepulchral silence of the dining room, like the whistle of a train about to derail. Not a single person moved a muscle. Jason was still petrified, his eyes glued to the notarized notice sticking out of his uniform pocket. Brittany was shaking in her chair, her face stained with the tears of her own exposed lies, while her parents, Robert and Connie, breathed heavily, like people who just found out the floor beneath their feet was made of rotting cardboard. The short ribs, smoking and perfect in the center of the table, were starting to get cold. The fat sizzled with less and less energy. I turned around, putting my back to them with the exact same calm I felt walking away from a finished piece of furniture, and walked down the hardwood hallway toward the entryway. My closed-toe shoes tapped out a steady beat. I opened the front door. Standing on the porch, hiding from the midday sun, was a young guy in a navy blue uniform holding a rectangular cardboard box with the black and gold logo of one of the most expensive boutiques at the downtown mall. The kid wiped the sweat off his forehead with the back of his free hand and held out a tablet. Afternoon. Rush delivery, cash on delivery for Miss Brittany Rojas, the driver announced, dragging out his words with the signature exhaustion of someone who's been driving in the heat all day. Total is $480.50. Cash or card is fine, but the reader's been acting up a bit, so I'd prefer cash if you have it. I heard the screech of a wooden chair being violently shoved backward. Brittany appeared at the end of the hallway, pale as a ghost, frantically wiping her cheeks with her hands. Behind her, the massive frame of her father loomed, followed by Jason's hunched shadow. I didn't ask for that to be delivered today, Brittany stammered, stumbling toward the door, trying to block the delivery guy's view into the house. I thought the charge already went through on my credit card online. There must be a glitch in the store's system. Label says clearly right here that your card declined 3 times last night for insufficient funds, and you selected the cash on delivery option this morning, so you wouldn't lose the hold on the order. Says it's designer shoes and a handbag on the manifest. Are you paying, or do I take the package back to the warehouse? She slowly turned to Jason, giving him that manipulative, pleading look that had worked for her for years. Babe, my card is maxed out. Can you cover it? It's the outfit I need for my parents' anniversary dinner next week. I'll pay you back on payday. I promise. The man had just been served with his imminent eviction. His father-in-law had just uncovered his absolute moral and financial bankruptcy. And his wife, right in the middle of the apocalypse, was asking him for almost $500 for a pair of shoes. I don't have that kind of money, Brittany, Jason whispered, his voice cracking, completely devoid of any trace of the cocky authority he had flaunted just minutes ago over the roast. I have $0 in my account and you know it. Just for a few days. I swear to God, I am not giving you another dime for your rags. I pulled the front door shut with a soft, definitive click. The silence that settled in the entryway was thick, suffocating, loaded with a humiliation so pure you could practically taste it in the air. Robert looked Jason up and down, scrutinizing his gray logistics supervisor uniform, his eyes locking onto the manila envelope sticking out of his chest pocket. The sheer contempt in the older man's eyes was absolute. He was stripping my son of his manhood, his dignity, and his status in a matter of seconds. Connie, Robert called out, never breaking eye contact with Jason. Brittany's mother appeared trembling in the hallway, clutching her purse to her chest. Go up to that guest room, pack our things, and call a cab. We are going to a hotel downtown. I am not spending another minute under this woman's roof, eating the meat she paid for, while my daughter and her husband play pretend millionaires on an old lady's pension. Jason's getting a promotion soon. We're going to buy our own house, I swear. They didn't say a word to me, not because they hated me, but because the guilt and secondhand embarrassment made it physically impossible for them to look me in the eye. Jason and Brittany stood frozen in the entryway, totally alone, surrounded by the echoes of their own lies, watching the taxi pull away down the tree-lined street. I didn't stick around to watch the funeral. I walked back into the dining room. I sat down in my chair, picked up the carving knife, cut a perfect slice of the short rib that was still holding a little heat, and served myself a generous spoonful of fresh salad. I ate in silence, chewing slowly, savoring the garlic and rosemary. From the hallway, the screaming started. The venomous accusations, the muffled insults. The sound of something plastic shattering against a wall. Jason blamed Brittany for her out-of-control spending. Brittany blamed Jason for being a total failure who couldn't defend her. Civil war had officially broken out in the enemy trenches. I poured myself half a glass of the Black Label red wine. I raised my glass in a silent toast to the empty chair at the head of the table, and I took a sip. The next day marked the beginning of the true siege, a 30-day siege where my only weapon was the relentless brutality of my routine. First thing Monday morning, I called the cable company. I requested the immediate cancellation of the premium TV package and ordered a password change on the Wi-Fi network. The router, which up until then had sat on a table in the hallway, was unplugged, moved to my bedroom, and locked away. When Brittany woke up at noon and realized she couldn't upload photos to her social media or stream her shows, she marched down to the kitchen demanding answers. I didn't answer her. I just kept scrambling my eggs for breakfast. Her temper tantrum bounced off my back like pebbles against a concrete wall. On Tuesday, I bought a heavy-duty forged steel padlock and installed it on the door of the large kitchen pantry, where I kept my non-perishables, my olive oils, my coffee beans, and my homemade jams. In the refrigerator, I emptied out the top 2 shelves, taking all my fresh vegetables, lean meats, and dairy, and relocated them to a small mini fridge Thomas used to keep in his workshop, which I had moved up to my room. On the empty kitchen shelves, I carefully arranged Brittany's half-eaten pizza boxes, sticky Asian takeout containers, and a carton of sour milk she had left out the night before. On Wednesday, Jason tried to confront me. He cornered me in the laundry room while I was loading a batch of whites. His face was gaunt, carved with deep, dark circles, and his uniform smelled like stale cigarette smoke, a habit he had picked back up out of pure anxiety. "What exactly are you trying to prove with this, Mom?" my son hissed, gripping the edge of the white plastic washing machine. "You cut off our internet. You locked up the food. Brittany is having panic attacks in the bedroom because she can't talk to her friends. Are you getting a kick out of torturing us? You think you're so powerful with that little notary paper? I simply stopped financing the lifestyle that you should be paying for your wife to have. If Brittany wants internet, you can buy her a data plan for her phone. If you guys want fresh food, the grocery store is 4 blocks away and stays open until 10 p.m. You demanded to run your own lives. I am simply giving you the absolute freedom to do it on your own dime. And I'll remind you, you have 27 days left." Brittany was forced to start washing her own clothes by hand in the bathroom sink, absolutely terrified to go near the laundry room for fear her clothes would magically vanish into industrial trash bags again. I saw her one afternoon hanging a few cheap blouses to dry on the doorknobs, her ruined, manicured hands shaking with frustration. Her country club friends completely stopped coming around. The rumor of her humiliation in front of her parents had spread like wildfire through dry brush. The illusion of the wealthy, sacrificial young woman had totally disintegrated, leaving behind nothing but a woman trapped in the misery of her own arrogance. It was during the second week that Thomas, my husband, finally decided to crawl out of his shell of cowardice. He had spent the last 14 days hiding in the tool shed at the back of the yard, listening to his football games on his portable radio, eating cold sandwiches I left on the back windowsill so he wouldn't have to cross paths with our son. But the tension was getting too heavy, even for him. One Tuesday night, while I was sitting at the dining room table sewing up a tear in the hem of a curtain, Thomas shuffled in wearing his worn-out slippers. He sat down in the chair across from me, clicked off his hearing aid, and gave me those watery, pleading eyes he always used when he wanted me to clean up the chaos he allowed. Thomas mumbled, scratching his gray, overgrown beard. "Don't you think that's enough? Jason is hurting really bad. I hear him crying out in the yard in the middle of the night. That girl, Brittany, she's pale as a ghost. They're family, Blood calls to blood. You can't just throw them out on the street like stray dogs. Tell them they can stay. Lay down the law if you have to, but don't break the family apart. I don't want to live in a house where my own son hates me." The black cotton thread pulled a perfectly straight line under the glow of the lamp. I looked at the man I had shared a bed with for 4.5 decades. The man who had abandoned me in every single trench, during every financial crisis, in every parenting conflict. You surrendered your family the day you put those headphones on so you wouldn't have to hear your daughter-in-law insult me, Thomas, I told him. My voice was completely stripped of anger, loaded only with a cold, immovable truth. You broke Jason when you taught him that ducking your head and hiding was how you be a man. This house is mine. I built it, I maintain it, and I decide who gets to breathe under this roof. Jason and Brittany are leaving on day 30. There's no negotiation. There's no magical forgiveness. If it hurts you that much to see them go, pack your bags and leave with them. I'm giving you the exact same freedom I gave him. But if you decide to stay in my house, you will follow my rules. And the first rule is that nobody sheds a single tear under this roof for the people who tried to destroy us. The remaining days burned down like the tobacco in Jason's cigarettes. Fast, toxic, leaving a trail of ash on the floor. On day 28, they started packing. They didn't hire professional movers. Obviously, they didn't have the credit. Jason scrounged up used cardboard boxes from the corner grocery store. The sound of packing tape ripping and sticking echoed through the hallways for 48 hours straight. The morning of day 30 dawned cloudy, with a cold breeze signaling the end of fall. At exactly 9 a.m., a rusted-out flatbed truck, probably borrowed from one of Jason's co-workers, parked out front. I sat down in the dark green velvet armchair in the living room, holding a mug of black coffee, and watched the parade of defeat. Jason carried the heavy boxes, his muscles shaking from the effort, his face dripping with cold sweat. He didn't look at me. He walked past the living room with his head down, dragging his feet. Brittany carried the lighter stuff, her nightstand lamps, the shiny plastic knickknacks I hated so much, her fashion magazines. The poetic irony of the day finally materialized when I saw her walk out the front door carrying the rest of her clothes. Since they couldn't afford wardrobe boxes, Brittany was carrying her sweaters and dresses stuffed inside massive black plastic bags, industrial-grade trash bags, the exact same kind I had used to feed the garbage compactor. She walked right past me, dragging the plastic across the hardwood floor, her eyes glued to the open front door, fleeing my presence like I was some highly contagious plague. By 11:30 a.m., the guest room was completely empty. All that was left was the dust piled up behind the furniture they never bothered to clean. Jason stopped in the threshold of the front door. He was filthy, exhausted, and utterly defeated. He was holding my house keys in his right hand. He stared at them for a second, pressed his lips together, and walked back into the living room. He stopped 6 feet away from my armchair and dropped the key ring onto the oak coffee table. The metal hit with a sharp clink. "Here are your damn keys," Jason said, his raspy voice scraping the very bottom of his shattered pride. "Are you happy, Mom? Are you proud of what you did? You won. You threw us out on the street. We're moving into a 2-bedroom apartment on the south side, right next to a highway full of noise, because that's the only place my deposit could cover. You destroyed your own flesh and blood over some clothes and your pride." "I didn't play a game, Jason. Therefore, I didn't win anything," I answered, lowering my coffee mug onto its ceramic coaster. "And I didn't destroy my blood. You destroyed yourself the day you let your wife throw her filth in my face while you stood there and clapped. The street you're moving to is the one you paved yourself with every single electric bill you refused to pay. Leave. And close the door gently. The hinges are freshly oiled." He turned around, walked down the hall, stepped out onto the porch, and pulled the heavy oak door shut. The click of the deadbolt was the most beautiful sound I had heard in 2 years. I stood up from the armchair, walked over to the front door, and threw the manual security bolt. Then I went to the kitchen, grabbed a bucket, filled it with hot water and pine-scented disinfectant, and spent the next 5 hours scrubbing the hardwood floors of the entire house, literally erasing the footprints of their shoes, purifying the air, reclaiming every single square inch of my territory. 6 months later, spring had brought the color back to the rose garden. The house was finally breathing again. I ripped out the living room rug that had trapped the sickly sweet smell of Brittany's perfume, leaving the hardwood bare and shining. My potted ferns and African violets had made a triumphant return from their exile in the backyard, reclaiming the sunny corners of the hallway and the end tables. Thomas was still living here, of course, but he had morphed into a quiet, docile ghost. He spent his days tending the garden, cleaning the gutters, speaking in a low voice, and making damn sure he never left a mess in the kitchen. The balance of power had been reset with the force of a hammer strike. It was a Thursday afternoon, right around 4:40 p.m. I was sweeping the sidewalk in front of my house, clearing away the dried flower petals the wind had knocked out of the trees. The roar of the municipal garbage truck's diesel engine announced its arrival from around the corner. The massive green and white rig hissed to a stop right in front of me. Frank, the broad-shouldered garbage man, hopped down onto the street. He had a bright smile, his face beaded with sweat. I held out a plastic cup filled with ice-cold lemonade I had made for him. "Afternoon, Miss Dorothy," Frank called out, taking the cup with a grateful nod and downing half of it in one gulp. "House is looking real nice. You can tell it's peaceful in there." He glanced up and down the street before lowering his voice a little, dropping into that neighborhood confidential tone that binds working-class people together. "Listen, I don't know if I should even mention this, but I saw your boy last week," Frank told me, a look of genuine pity crossing his face. "They rerouted us for a couple of days over by those old apartment complexes on the south side. I saw him walking out of one of those gray buildings with the water damage on the walls. He was in his dirty uniform, walking toward the bus stop, and the wife, Miss Brittany, I saw her working the cash register at that discount pharmacy on the same block. She was wearing one of those neon green store vests. She was screaming her head off at a customer over some expired coupons. They looked real tired, Miss Dorothy." The image of Brittany, the woman who demanded sushi platters and humiliated old women in front of her rich friends, trapped behind a register fighting over discount coupons. It didn't bring me joy, or triumph, or remorse. It made me feel the exact same thing I felt when the compactor crushed her silk blouse. The quiet certainty that the math of the universe is exact, and the debt had been paid in full. Everyone builds the roof they ultimately decide to live under, Frank, I told him, taking the empty plastic cup back from his hands. Have a good route. In the middle of the spare room, balanced across two wooden sawhorses, sat an antique dining chair I had picked up at a flea market that very morning. The mahogany wood was scratched, the seat was totally sunken in, and the original fabric was rotting away. It was an absolute disaster. It was perfect. I walked over to my toolbox, I pulled out my pliers, my upholstery tack hammer, and my staple gun. I ran my calloused fingers, traced with old scars, over the edge of the damaged wood. I grabbed the new fabric, a heavy, durable, unbleached canvas, and stretched it tight over the fresh foam. I pressed the nose of the staple gun hard against the wood, calculating the perfect angle. I took a deep breath in the absolute silence of my own house, and I pulled the trigger. The metallic crack rang out loud, steady, and final, driving the staple exactly where I wanted it to be.